All right, I want to welcome everyone to this meeting of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter of SABR. I am Bruce McClure, the chapter chair, and we always hold our meetings in conjunction with the Gardner Waterman chapter of SABR in Vermont, Dr. Clayton Truder, chair. Now, this evening, we have another very special guest here to present his research and his new book. Roberto Alomar was not just a five-tool Hall of Famer. He was a magician on the diamond, a generational talent whose defensive wizardry left teammates and opponents breathless. Yet despite his 12 All-Star selections and 10 Gold Glove awards, he has remained one of the most contentious and enigmatic characters in baseball's history. David Ostrowsky's new book, Roberto Alomar, The Complicated Life and Legacy of a Baseball Hall of Famer, is the first complete, balanced biography of arguably the greatest second baseman in the history of Major League Baseball. It covers Alomar's impressive career, his altercation with umpire John Hirschbeck and their eventual friendship, the allegations stemming from Alomar's personal life, never before heard stories about his conflicts with both minor and major league teammates, and his global influence. And David's here tonight to talk about Roberto Alomar, and all I've got to say now is, David Ostrowsky, welcome to Northern New England. How are you this evening?
I'm doing very well, Bruce. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I am thrilled to have you and to talk about Roberto Alomar and his life and career and all. An interesting guy, to say the least. And you were the first author to really take up the mantle and write about this guy that has such a history in the game. So I'm just going to turn it over to you so that you can discuss your book and you can tell the folks here how you want things to go this evening and how you'd like to present. So you're on, man. Go get them.
Yeah. Well, it's an honor to be able to share my book, Roberto Alomar, The Complicated Life and Legacy of a Baseball Hall of Famer. You know, as I was kind of talking to Bruce earlier, I'm most comfortable answering questions, really, because I think a lot of the really in-depth conversations happen organically. I'll share a few things and then I'll kind of open up the floor and answer any questions. But, basically, I wrote a book several years back about sports in 1993 in general, and obviously that covered the Toronto Blue Jays winning their back-to-back World Series that year, Joe Carter's walk-off home run. And Alomar was a character in that book because he was, one of the two or three most important players on that Blue Jays team. As I was working on that book, I was like, doing some research, and I'm like, God, I want to write a whole book about him. I can't just write 4 or 5 pages about this guy and then forget it. I need to write a book about him. And not just because he was this, great player, who made 5 errors total in the 1992 season. Then a few years later was batting third for the American League in the All-Star game in '96 in Philadelphia. But the stories, his friendship with John Hirschbeck that most people don't even know about, that happened years after their conflict. The work he did when Hurricane Maria in the immediate aftermath of that in Puerto Rico, the conflict he had with Omar Vizquel that really lasted throughout his whole time in Cleveland. And then I start this book in April 2020, and a year later, of course, new allegations come out. There already had been prior sexual misconduct allegations from 2009, 2010 that compelled Commissioner Rob Manfred to ban him from baseball. But this was not the reason I wrote this book. It just so happened that this bombshell of a development occurred while I was a year into it. Unfortunately, I was already, 30 interviews deep and spoke with like maybe 95% of those people that I needed to, or else this book would not have been possible. Had I just, had I been a month into the writing process, it would not have been possible because at this point he was kind of a, persona non grata around the game of baseball. But fortunately, like I said, I started writing this having no knowledge at all about those allegations that make him, along with Pete Rose, kind of in rarefied air, so to speak, in terms of having this designation. So it made his story much more complicated than I think it already was, and I don't think it was very straightforward to begin with, but it certainly added an important layer that needed to be addressed. And I think I do that in some capacity to the extent that I was, able to. But I think ultimately, there's a lot of anecdotes here from, as Bruce mentioned, I talked to dozens of former teammates, opponents, managers, writers that really never came to light when he was playing, just because he was such a great player for so many years that, there was really no need to mention these things. But now that he's retired, I think a lot of these stories are important to just understand, as well as some of the good deeds that he's done too. So, it's my hope that this book kind of paints a comprehensive picture of Robbie, his career, and also his family. He comes from a very esteemed baseball family. His brother Sandy was an all-star, for a 6-time all-star, and his dad also played for a number of years, of course, Sandy Alomar Sr. So I would love to answer any questions that there are about Alomar writing this book, how it's been received. I'll do my best to answer those.
If you want to ask a question of David Ostrowsky tonight, go down to the bottom of the screen. You'll see the button marked reactions. If you click that button, there is another button marked raise hand. Hit that button. It'll get you in line to have a conversation directly with David Ostrowsky. But I want to ask a question, and I'm going to come in hot.
Sure.
Because this one's been on my mind really for years.
Yeah.
And really since I had you scheduled for this meeting. Alomar is banned from baseball for life, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, I know that Toronto removed him from their ring of excellence.
The Hall of Excellence, yeah.
The Hall of Excellence that they call it up there. And there was a sort of protracted discussion about his place in the Baseball Hall of Fame when the last set of allegations went down.
Right.
Now, the Hall of Fame stated he's already in. We're not pulling him out.
Right.
Did you get a sense from anybody that you interviewed, or did you get a sense yourself as to how people thought about that decision? Based on the fact they're not letting Pete Rose in. Right. We've already had that discussion. Keith O'Brien was here a few weeks ago. Keith, thanks for the book. And they're not letting him in. But Alomar has done some pretty terrible things.
Allegedly.
Now, great. There's a lot of others.
Yeah.
But did you get a sense of anything on his place?
So that's a really good question. So as I mentioned earlier, most of the people I interviewed personally who knew him pretty well, I spoke to before April 2021. So in terms of, we did talk about the Hall of Fame candidacy and how it took him a second time to get in to the Hall. Okay, so back just a little to rewind for a second. In 2010, he was on like 73.5% of the ballots, I want to say, or something. And everyone knew that was the writer's way to punish him one more time for, the incident with John Hirschbeck. The next year, in 2011, he jumped up to 90%, which was like unprecedented. You know what I mean? Usually you kind of like go from like 73 to 76, right? But, so there were people I spoke with who said, that was just like totally ridiculous, right? Like, total crime that he had to wait one more year when he was an obvious first ballot Hall of Famer. As far as his plaque not being removed from not only the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, but also the one in St. Mary's, Ontario, the Canadian Hall of Fame.
Oh, that's right. He's in the Canadian Hall of Fame too. That's right.
And he's not welcome at their events, but his plaque is still there. Oh. And I'm sorry.
So Karen just went, oh, gee, wow. Okay, go on.
No, he was, Jane Forbes Clark, who's works for the Hall, gave an official statement, when he was removed from baseball, but no, he was in good standing in 2011 when he was elected and then inducted that summer. And no, he will not be removed. I go into the book a little bit about how there are guys in the Baseball Hall of Fame, like a Cap Anson, for example, or Rogers Hornsby, who did some despicable things in terms of, race relations. Duke Snyder was charged with tax evasion. The list goes on, right? Alomar, when he was inducted, was not banned from baseball. When Pete Rose was eligible for the Hall, he was already banned from baseball. So you mentioned Rose, so I think you can draw a distinction there.
Point well taken. I don't think he's not He's not welcome in Cooperstown, if I recall correctly.
No, he's not. And here's the thing, just that it would be really interesting had he been, whatchamacallit, banned from baseball and then became eligible for the Hall. That would be interesting, you know? You know what I'm saying?
Well, if
Like,
he's banned from baseball, he would be off the ballot. Pete Rose hasn't sniffed
Right.
the ballot since.
right.
Yeah,
He would be,
so-
yeah. So, he's not welcome. No, and no MLB sanctioned events can he be part of anyway. And what's interesting is he didn't come back to induction weekend very often. Like I remember in 2017, as I was doing research, like his good friend Pudge Rodriguez was inducted. He didn't go. You know, and most living Hall of Famers, or many, go, and he wasn't there. So. But
Very
no, he's
interesting.
not invited to anything of that sort.
Well, we've got some people in line here. I'm going to write to Karen Holler. And Karen, you're up. How you doing?
Fine. I just wanted to know, what's your process when you write a book? What do you use? Do you start with outlines? Do you have interviews?
Yeah. It's a great question. So, the Hall of Fame, the Library Museum, has a wonderful resource where they provide, if you want, free of charge articles, lots of articles on any, doesn't have to be a Hall of Famer, it can just be anyone who played Major League Baseball. So you can right away get like 300 articles that you can kind of comb through, right? And that kind of gives you a brief sense, of kind of where the direction and what might be some possible chapters. And then you kind of like, the mindset I had is like, what's beyond baseballreference.com, right? Like, what are the compelling stories that are going to keep me motivated and interested to write this and spend months and years working on this? And God willing, engage my audience, my readers, right? So that's kind of like the mindset is like, what are the stories that can comprise each and every chapter? And then when I have those, then, you're simultaneously trying to get interviews. It's kind of a race against time because some guys are working and then they're going to be retiring and then maybe not be in great condition and so on and so forth. So then you try to get as many interviews as possible, but you need to have a little direction. And I think I really try to get that direction by combing through these articles and kind of coming up with storylines and having each chapter devoted to a certain storyline. I hope that answers your question.
Norm Ginsburg, you're up. How are we doing?
Good. The first comment I was going to make is, how does he compare with Kirby Puckett? I mean, I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember the charges against either one of them, other than the fact that I think his was also sexual. But was one considered more blatant than worse than the other one? And has Kirby Puckett been like banned from the Hall of Fame and from? I know he's obviously in. So is he on other Hall of Fames?
It's a really good question. So initially in my epilogue, I kind of actually compare Alomar to Kirby Puckett because A, they played roughly in the same era, and B, yes, Kirby Puckett had, I don't want to say similar, but also had sexual misconduct allegations that came out, I want to say in 2001, I'm not mistaken.
Wow, that long ago?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to say in 01. Frank DeFord, who's no longer around, wrote a really good article in Sports Illustrated, a cover story that chronicled, like the guy that no one knew, right? He was this beloved guy in the Twin Cities, but it turns out he had a lot of baggage. No, he is in the Hall of Fame. There's never any talk of Puckett not being in the Hall of Fame, being banned from baseball. Of course, he died in 2006. I don't recall there being any, but I mean, there were some pretty cringeworthy allegations against him that initially I had kind of mentioned in the epilogue, and then I actually removed them because I didn't want the focus to be elsewhere. But there's a guy who played for one team only throughout his whole career and was just this larger than life character in Minnesota. And these issues were not really known about Puckett until well after he retired. At least when we were known publicly.
And I guess from the timing, he was already known to be. He had, I know he was blind and a lot of physical ailments, which might have made made a difference as far as the penalty, the public opinion.
I just looked it up. Alomar is actually in the Baltimore Orioles Hall of Fame. He's not been removed.
Yep.
I thought that was interesting. I'm an Orioles guy, that's why I wanted to take a look and see as if he was pulled. Go ahead.
One thing for sure, he is not in the Mets. His Met years was not among his best.
That is true. He is not in the Mets Hall of Fame, and I think Steve Cohen would rather not mention his name. So Let's move forward. Alex Stace, you're up. Alec, how are you?
We're going to start a New York Hall of Fame for people that were good on other teams and were terrible in New York, and he would be one of them. Like Sonny Gray would be one of them. We have many that we could name. I think it's a combination of kind of lovability beforehand, as you indicate, David, and whether players were loved when they played, and then the stuff that's involved. But a lot of the guys were not beloved, right, when they played. Pete Rose, Schilling, A-Rod, Barry Bonds, some of these people, Clemens, and Alomar, and so when they're not beloved to start with, they it's like when they say war points to get into the Hall of Fame, there's also like sympathy points, and people start with some or they don't have any to start with. So I think that has a lot to do with how people are treated ultimately. Another thing I think has to do with it is unfortunately race and ethnicity, and I guess I would draw a comparison between Orlando Cepeda, Marichal, and Alomar as all three who are, kind of had some stuff happen. Marichal more on the field, but that probably didn't get as much sympathy from people generally because, they didn't necessarily have, they didn't tell their own story, or, they weren't as, camera friendly as the press would like them to be, if that makes sense as a concept.
Yeah. No, and I address there is, some race issues here. I mean, it's a different story, but a little over a year after Alomar spat at Hirschbeck, there was a linebacker for the Denver Broncos, Bill Romanowski, who on Monday Night Football spat in the face of J.J. Stokes, a wide receiver for San Francisco, an African-American man. I don't want to say it was an afterthought, but I mean, it really did not get nearly the amount of hype that this thing with Alomar did. And I granted, it was different. He brought up the umpire's son afterwards, and obviously that was a mistake, and it really escalated. But it's just one example, I think, of the optics of it were just different, I think.
Let's keep going here. Let's go to Gary Joquin. Gary, how are you?
Oh, pretty good here. My question is primarily about the Hall of Fame and the resources that you had access to.
Yeah.
Are they digital? Are they remotely accessible? Do some things still need to be examined in person? And is there a membership paywall to gain access to them?
So that's a very good questions, I should say. So no, there's no paywall at all. There's a woman, Cassidy Lent.
She's a delight.
She's a delight. Yeah, absolute delight. She's a pro's pro. She's just wonderful. She's, the archivist there, and she's just wonderful. It's a PDF of all different secondary sources. And obviously it depends, like Babe Ruth is going to have a much bigger, a bulkier amount, right, than a guy who just plays for 10 days. So every player imaginable. And it's just one PDF of all the different files. If that answers your question, Gary.
Yeah, it does. How good is the search engine
The search engine, what do you mean?
to be able to scan the document, to search the documents?
Oh, I see what you're saying. It's fine. I had no issues with it.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't recall, just Control F,
Sounds like another world to explore. Thank you.
yeah, sure.
I will say that if you get the chance to go to the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown and you get into the library where the research really takes place, Cassidy is an incredible resource and so willing to work with anyone in there. And I urge any SABR member who hasn't been to Cooperstown yet, get there and get into that library to understand exactly what is behind those walls that you don't see. It's incredible. And I've only scratched the surface of it. David, go.
No, I'm sorry. The email document, it's just like the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Like you said, the library itself is mind blowing.
Yeah, and Cassidy's terrific. I got to have her on. I got to get a hold of her. I keep saying I spoke to her probably a year ago, and she's like, "Sure, I'll come in and talk to you guys." And then we just never crossed paths again. I got to get her going on a talk too. Let's go to look who's next, ladies and gentlemen. It is my wife, Molly. You're up. Go, Molly. How are you?
Good. And Gus decided to join us.
Yes.
David, I had a question that kind of relates more to the first book that inspired you to write the second book.
Yep.
Was it a favorite team of yours that started it, or that favorite game, or a favorite season? What inspired all of this writing to start? Does that make sense?
Yeah, the 93 book, look, I was born in 84, so I kind of grew up, in the 90s and became a big sports fan around then. And that was just one year I remember where I totally got hooked. But, it was also, I think, one year where like you had a few dynasty teams like the Bulls, the Cowboys, the Blue Jays, and it kind of all coincided in one year. And then it also happened to be, the year where I think the Camden Yards was really showcased to the world in the All-Star game that year. I think, everyone knows about the influence of Camden Yards here, but I think really that one evening, July 93, was really special, right? Where that ballpark was shown. This was before the MLB Network, really before, highlights were shown all over the place. And I think for a lot of baseball fans, that was really special. And then there was also like the comeback game, the Bills and Oilers. So I thought that one year in particular, it was kind of a nice trip down memory lane, that book, kind of a passion project.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But boy, do I miss This Week in Baseball every Saturday.
Oh, I know.
Oh, come on. Somebody's got to do that again. Let's go to my friend Dixie Tarango. Dixie, how are you?
I'm fine now that I see Gus.
There you go.
By the way, the proper term for Cassidy Lint, as we know in the 19th century committee, is Saint Cassidy.
Okay.
All right. So when I email her to get her to come to see us, I'm going to refer to her as Saint Cassidy.
You can
And
do
I'm going
that.
to tell her that you told me I could do it.
Go right ahead.
Okay.
And if you save me 3 minutes at the end of everything tonight, I will tell you a story of why she gets that name.
You're on.
My question for David is pretty simple. This is a controversial figure. What were the one or two things that you found the toughest to research and write about?
Ooh.
That's a good one. So the sexual misconduct allegations from spring 2021, it was very hard to get anyone to talk about that on the record. I combed through quite a few articles and, news clippings. That was a really tough to get any groundbreaking, unearth any new material for obvious reasons. I did include in the Toronto Star, Melissa Vergey, who came out with her account in late May 21. It was the second round of allegations. I did include her first person narrative that she shared, she published, that people wouldn't have access to. So that is word for word in there. And then the other part would be, I would say, his issues in Cleveland. I had a few writers share some stories about how he had issues with Travis Fryman, with even his brother. There was one game right before the 2000 All-Star break in Cincinnati where he and his brother really went at it in the clubhouse after a game, and then with Omar Vizquel too. And that was a little tricky because several writers gave me information and I was able to corroborate, but it was hard to get guys on those teams, on the 99-2000 Indians, to really go into that. I would kind of hint at it a little bit in questions, but that was kind of hard. But I feel very confident in saying that whatever I published about that in that chapter those years, I'm confident in its accuracy. And, I know for a fact that Roberto has been aware of this book, his friends I've been speaking to, and all I can say is they haven't denied anything that has been published. They haven't denied anything yet. So.
Your last comment there, his friends haven't denied anything.
Yep.
So I've been, thinking about the history of Roberto Alomar here as we've been discussing this evening, and you touched on it a little bit. And the one thing that shocked the daylights out of me when it all hit the fan, so to speak, was the allegations that he knowingly transmitted HIV to several women. Were you able to investigate that claim? Doesn't look like, I can see you shaking your head, but were you able to investigate or add any veracity to that claim, or were those records sealed? Because that was a jaw-dropping claim. And then my next question would be, and maybe I'm way off base here, but my next question would be, were the beefs that he had with players, did any of it go toward these allegations, or could it possibly have been him being razzed, teased, beaten up, so to speak, about his sexuality?
So those are some really good questions, and I'll try to address them all. I'll say one thing with the sexuality, because I think a lot of people, it's not funny, is not the word, it's interesting. When I've been promoting this book on social media for the past few months now, all I hear about is the spitting, like that's all I hear about. And I think a lot of people don't understand that on that evening, September 27th, 96, there had been rumors at the time that Alomar was gay, and John Hirschbeck did refer to him as a fag, allegedly. And a lot of people don't understand. He was, you can call it provoked, whatever, but there was something said, right? So I find that interesting, that a lot of people don't, understand that there are two sides to that story. There was an incident I go into when he was a 17-year-old in Charleston, when he was playing in single A. He was 17, right? And he was bullied by teammates, and he flipped out, and he assaulted one in retaliation. Not that that's a story that's really known outside of my book. In terms of the issues with teammates like Fryman, like Vizquel, I mentioned, some other guys in Baltimore. No, I mean, there were no allegations at that time about sexual misconduct, so I don't think that really had anything to do with it. And I don't think it was anything more than just egos clashing, which happens in probably every locker room in pro sports. And as far as the other question, could you just repeat that again about the 09 and 010 allegations? No, my publisher, Roman and Littlefield, was pretty adamant that they wanted everything that I mentioned there to address it, but not to go, I don't want to say too to the weeds, but they were super careful that everything was backed up with sources. And that's the kind of thing that was very, very hard to, again, get people to talk on the record. I will say that 95% of the people I've spoken to, and I've spoken to some really educated fans, have no recollection of that whatsoever. That episode in his life when he was allegedly, exposed multiple women, including girlfriend, wife, to HIV. The only thing I'll say about that is none of those women ever tested positive for HIV.
Is that right?
None of them.
Okay, so that I just learned something from you, because it was my understanding that the reason that they sued was because they tested positive.
Nope.
So I just learned something here. Thank you very much. That's very interesting. So that lends itself to.
They alleged that he had symptoms, that they were traumatized, but there was, and I don't.
Yeah.
Source, but yes, I read multiple sources that said presumably he never tested positive. That they never tested positive. That was the consensus from different sources I read.
That's very interesting.
They
that just
never tested
dispelled
right.
a lot of what I thought was fact.
Yep.
In my own mind. Let's go on to, we've got some more hands raised up here. I'm going to go actually to Joe Ross first, because Joe hasn't gotten in here yet this evening. Joe, you're up. How are you?
I have a question that could be for David, but also for everybody. And that is, what's your real feeling about the hall itself? Should entrance into the Hall of Fame be based on how well they play baseball? It is, after all, a baseball Hall of Fame. Or should we also consider things like their background or other considerations? And when I say that, I don't want to include someone who gambles against their own team, because that's an entirely different thing. But assuming that we're talking about someone who's a great player and not a very nice person, what's everybody's feeling about should they be eligible for the Hall?
Let's start with David. David's a guest of honor here this evening. David, what's your feeling on the Baseball Hall of Fame and how it should be filled up, portrayed, used, whatever term you want to use? Go springboarding off of Joe's comments.
I mean, look, in a perfect world, everyone would be as pleasant as Joe Mauer, who's getting in this summer.
And I met Joe Mauer when I was working minor league ball, and you're right, he's one of the nicest fellows you ever want to meet. Go on, I'm sorry.
No one could ever say anything bad about him, and I think that he's probably not going to be in the Hall of Fame one day, but the same thing could be said about David Wright too. I mean, you just could not, they walk on water, right? Unfortunately, that's not the case. You have guys who, have done a lot of bad things illegally, unethically. I have no problem with them being in, because I think if you look at the game of baseball, there's 26 guys on each team, there's 30 teams, right? There's a lot of bad dudes playing baseball right now, and I think if we knew half of what went on behind closed doors, you may not even want to watch another Major League Baseball game. So it's not, I can't say this guy should be in or shouldn't be in because of his character. I'm not talking about PEDs. I'm just talking about, behavior and, what they've done or allegedly done, because otherwise I don't think we could ever watch a Major League Baseball game again. I will say though, I think it's one person that comes to mind that's really interesting is Albert Bell. And I think that really hurt his chances of getting in, because I think he would have maybe gotten in with the voters, by the BBWAA, had it not been for his trail controversies. That's one guy that comes to mind that I can think of where it really may have impacted his candidacy.
I mean, the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame is a microcosm of society. There's bad guys in there, there's good guys in there. It's just like every roster of every major and minor league team in the country today. Bad guys, good guys, whatever. The thing today is that if you're going to be a dope and just willfully behave poorly, you're going to get caught by somebody's iPhone. It's going to happen.
Right.
If Pete Rose were playing today and gambling on Major League Baseball today, he'd get caught because somebody would have him on video doing it. It's that simple.
Well, how about one like Aroldis Chapman, right? Like he was a key figure in the Cubs.
Yeah.
Right, in 2016. But I don't see too many people say, oh, the Cubs, that World Series is tainted because they had Aroldis Chapman. So, you can't,
And nobody says that the Reds were tainted in 75 and 76 with Pete Rose on the roster.
Right.
Nobody says the Phillies were tainted in 80 with Rose on the roster. But he violated Rule 21. He got caught. He's out. Same with, Alomar was investigated. It's proven that he did some bad things that warranted his banishment from baseball. He's out. I'm a big Hall guy, but I think the Hall of Fame is morphing. I think society in general is morphing into behavior is going to be on the docket for, Rose would have blamed his interpreter. I just saw that in the chat. Oh gosh, Alex, come on.
But wait a minute, hold on.
Now let me finish my thought. Joe.
Okay.
Behavior is going to come into play because the writers of today, the next generation of those who are covering our game, are going to take that into account more and more. You have people like Gabrielle Starr, who is a friend of mine, who is here in Boston. Norm is shaking his head. Yes, I know her. I think I know her well enough to be able to say this. She is a fierce, brilliant, and frankly, outspoken writer when it comes to a ball player's behavior, his actions, however you want to put that. I believe that those ideas are going to come into play moving forward. And I think in some cases they already are. Kurt Schilling, how you doing? Because society's going to get there. Now, Joe, what was your retort?
I was thinking about the Pete Rose idea. When he was banned for gambling. Well, every time you watch a game today, there's more ads for gambling than anything else.
And Joe, you've mentioned this in past, past meetings that we've had, that there's sport books in just about everywhere.
So
and that's a very good point too.
So now that we say that, should we go back and say, well, wait a minute, maybe Pete Rose should be in the Hall?
Then if we do that,
if you count his ability,
go ahead.
If you count his ability, certainly belongs there for his baseball. And he didn't bet against his own team. He bet on his own team.
That's still against Rule 21.
Well, I understand that.
Okay.
It was while he was managing, correct? Not playing.
It was while he was managing. Well, it was proven while he was managing, but now you're starting to see stories trickle out about how he was gambling as a player too. And Johnny Bench will not say no that he wasn't gambling as a player. But now, along those lines, so Alomar's already in. He has allegations that are brought against him, which ban him from baseball for life. Now, writers today might say it's time to take his plaque off the wall. Yeah. But you've made some very, very good points, David, about why his plaque is and will stay up, because he's been separated from the festivities based on something that happened afterwards.
Yeah,
it's a very good point. Go.
His double play partner in Cleveland, Omar Vizquel, was inching closer to election, and then there were some horrendous allegations that also involved sexual misconduct.
Yes,
that came out, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And if you look at the numbers, they've been dipping, and not just dipping, they've been going down pretty steeply. And he's not going to get in now. And I think that character clause is going to have a big part. I know there's some other questions. I want to make sure I can hopefully.
Yeah, we got plenty of questions here. Let's go to Dewey Jones. Dewey, let's get you in. How you doing, buddy?
Doing great, thanks.
Go.
A generation ago, we didn't know a lot about ball players. What we read in Sporting News, the out-of-town teams, what you might pick up in the Boston Globe or the Herald for a kid growing up in Vermont. That was the source for getting news about baseball. We didn't know any of this behind-the-scenes sorts of stuff, and I think the vast majority of fans didn't know those things either. You only knew what you read, and if the writers just didn't think it was relevant to the player's performance, they just didn't report it. And I think that still plays today. Tell us about what they're doing on the field, unless they're doing something really outlandishly criminal, where they're going to face charges. Report that, I guess. But it's gotten out of hand with the internet, getting into people's personal lives and saying and doing things that probably should just be left alone.
The ironic thing is, writers have never had less access to the players than ever before. Because of the consolidation of media, right? Because there's not as many newspapers. They're certainly not spending money to have their writers travel around the team. And, like when Gammons was covering the Red Sox, he would shag fly balls at them before games, right? Now the window of access, even for reporters who are with the team on a day-to-day basis, is much less.
They traveled on the train with them.
Right.
Back in the 50s, they'd be on the train and they would play cards together.
Right.
And
They were telling around, but now social media, so.
Yeah.
Interesting. Let's go to Alex States. Alec, how you doing?
Good. A few quick observations. Great discussion. Only this group is without sin. I will just say that. And that saint person that you were mentioning earlier. So yes, there is more frailty in human behavior. I would say that baseball and other sports actually rake in a lot more revenue than they used to because of social media, smartphones, being able to broadcast everything. So although I like the old style newspapers, the reality is that social media has been good for sports generally, hugely good, and gambling. And I think the Baseball Hall of Fame is stricter than it used to be, not only because people found out, but because baseball doesn't want people outside of baseball to think poorly of them. It's not really about what baseball people think. It's about what they think other people are going to think about them. And that's why they changed the standards. So I have three rules, three halls, the Hall of Fame, the real Hall of Fame, and then we have the Hall of Cheaters. So those are people who were in the, would be in the Hall of Fame, but they cheat. And then there's the Hall of Jerks, and they can all be next to each other, right? So we put Clemens and A-Rod and various people in the Hall of Cheaters, as noted, and then there would be the Hall of Jerks. Rose might be in both, actually, but like Alomar should be in the Hall of Jerks, and Kirby Puckett and people like that. So I think it's a good solution. More social media content, more broadcasting opportunities. We'd have the Hall of Jerks induction ceremony, possibly the Hall of Cheaters induction, with 3 ceremonies a year instead of 1. You guys in?
I had a great place for the Hall of Jerks just down the street from the Hall of Fame, but it was rented by a retro arcade, so I guess that's out of the question. You're gonna have to wait a little bit while more. Norm, you're up. Go.
Just an obvious question for David, and that's, did you interview Roberto Alomar? Did you interview Roberto?
Great question. No, twice he declined to be interviewed through his manager.
Thank you.
Yep.
Gary.
Alex stole my thunder. I was going to suggest that Cooperstown open up a Hall of Shame wing. I am curious, though, about David's next writing project and whether or not there are actually any biographies about squeaky clean ball players, or is the general public too enamored with bad boys? And if the latter is true, does this make it harder to write your next book?
I haven't really, I've been so busy kind of, pumping out this. I haven't really given too much thought to the next one. I've been so surprised by how many people don't understand. I shouldn't say much. Like, the subtitle says The Complicated Life and Legacy, right? Blah, blah, blah. They think like I'm writing this with them. They think Alomar's making money off this, and I'm like, no. This is like unauthorized. Like, I'm not like doing this as an ode to him. This isn't a love letter to Robbie Alomar. This is like an objective book, right? But a lot of people are like, no, I don't want any part of this at all. He's a total whatever, I personally find it much more interesting to write about someone who's got a lot of, there's a lot of bad qualities to him as well as good qualities. But writing about like Joe Mauer or Edgar Martinez or Jim Tomei, I would find really boring. I would find that really dull to write a biography about one of those guys. The utmost respect for them as people, and as ball players, but I would find that really, really dull. So I needed that morally complex character, and that's why I was so intrigued by Alomar's story.
It's a very good point. It's a very good point. Molly, you're up.
Just getting back to the Hall of Fame, Bruce and I, we have a family membership. We haven't been there in about a year. But especially when we walk into the plaque gallery, for us, it's almost like, I don't want to call it a religious experience, but it's hallowed ground. And it's very quiet in there, and it's very serene, and it's the utmost of respect that you can pay a player, living or dead, I feel. And if you go through the whole hall, for several years, they have had a survey upstairs asking about steroid use and if players should be in there. And it's a very hotly debated topic amongst people who come through the hall to visit. And Bruce and I, he will tell you, we've had this discussion many, many times. And I kind of feel like Gary about the Hall of Shame, but at the same time, those first players came in on their merits. And I feel like, why should we change that? And adjust for cheaters or adjust for please help, inadequacies.
Inadequacies.
Thank you. And I agree with Bruce that their character is their character, and their social media is going to be a bigger factor too. So that was just what I wanted to say. And thank you for coming and presenting to us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Karen. Karen, did you have a question? Unmute yourself if you had a question. There you
Yes, I
go.
have a question. I just wanted to know, through all of the stuff that you found with this book, how much of that are rumors and how many are facts?
That's a really good question. So it's a fine line because, I've read book biographies before where it's kind of like just a summary of their baseball reference page, so to speak. And I really didn't want it to be that. But at the same time, every story that I included, good and bad, I was really certain that, it was backed up with, either primary source interviews, articles, what have you. There were things that I heard from people who were around, but I just didn't feel comfortable publishing just because I didn't think they sound a little outlandish, people, I don't know. But then as I mentioned earlier, like one of his really good friends has read the book and he hasn't denied anything. He didn't maybe care for the way I characterized something, which I tried really hard not to editorialize it, but no one's denied anything. So I feel comfortable that, even though these things happened decades ago and memories can be hazy, that there's truth behind these things that I published, or else I wouldn't have, put my
Okay,
name.
thank you.
Kate Sermon, did you have a question?
I do briefly.
Go.
And sorry, it's been a few weeks since I've been here. This has been excellent. Some of this I'd kind of forgotten about with life things, but moving ahead, the one thing I've thought about with the hall, I've been there. I'm a member of the Friends of the Hall, and it is hallowed ground. I just, it's just a special place. Based on Roberto Alomar and some of these folks, down the road, eventually is coming a person named Jose Altuve
Yeah.
of the Houston Astros, and now I don't know, but when he retires 5 years down the road, I mean, I don't agree with what was done with the 2017 Astros, but would he be someone you talked about? Someone with, I don't mean him, I don't know the man or anything, but to me, there's still kind of a suspicious haze around he and Bregman. I don't know if Bregman his stats are as great as Altuve's,
Right.
but is that type of baseball player sounds like possibly your next down the road.
Yeah.
Because I think when his time comes for Hall of Fame consideration, there may be some residual effects from 2017. What do you think?
Great point, Catherine. In the epilogue, I mentioned him for
Oh,
two
okay.
reasons. One, because he is the modern day Roberto Alomar in a sense. He's not going to have the number of gold gloves that Robbie had, but he's won 2 World Series titles. He's the preeminent, second baseman of his generation. He did win an MVP award. Robbie didn't have that, and he's definitely, he's going to get 3,000 hits, and Alomar got like 2,700 something. But then the other really eerie, similarity is that he's going to probably not get in on the very first ballot because writers are going to make him wait just like they made Alomar wait. But I bet you anything he'll be 90%, 95% above his second time, So I think there's such a close parallel there between those two guys. They both happen to be Latino. It's interesting, like just how similar they are. Neither is a particularly physically imposing person. But yeah, I believe Altuve would be a second ballot Hall of Famer, no question. And I think Beltran will get in eventually. But I think it's going to take a few years because of that incident. Whereas I think Beltran maybe would be more of a year 3 or year 4 guy if it had not been for that incident or incidents.
It's been a pretty fascinating discussion. We've springboarded from Robbie Alomar to the Baseball Hall of Fame, which has been kind of fascinating. Alex can have one more comment. So Alec, go, you're last tonight.
If all the Astros can be quarantined and put in at some point 5 years after my demise, that would be better. Let's not let them in one at a time for the 2017 group. They need to all be held to some date that we can either boycott or it's past our time. That's just one person's opinion. Really cool discussion. A very interesting character. Thank you.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed speaking about it.
David, show us the book again and tell us how we can get it.
Yeah, so this is the book. It's obviously, on Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, libraries, etc. But also through my publisher's website. I know I sent out a discount code, where you get like 30% off. I think it's capital RLFANDF30. So it's R as in Robert, LAN as in Nancy, DF as in Frank, 30. So that's probably the most affordable way you can get it. And yeah, I really hope if people do pick it up that they enjoy it and learn something from it. And it's been a blast speaking to you guys tonight.
And if you did not get that flyer, send me an email at bruce@brucemcclurenh.com, and I will send that flyer off to you so you have the code written down for you. Dixie wanted to get in for one more thing, so I'm going to have Dixie go for it.
Okay, I promised you a Cassidy story, and here it is.
Go.
2 weeks ago was the 19th Century Conference in Cooperstown, April 19th and 20th. About 90 people showed up for it. It's something that the Hall of Fame knows is coming for a whole year. So everyone is prepared for just about everything, except a power outage in the entire village, which happened on Friday. About 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the power went out in most of Cooperstown. A branch had fallen down off a tree and cracked a few wires, and that was it. Now, at the beginning of this, no one knew if the power was going to be out for the rest of the day or a couple of hours. No one knew anything, except that the 19th Century Conference was pretty much screwed at that moment. Cassidy, being completely calm during this and calculating during this, figured out that now the conference had things that they were supposed to be doing between the power outage and when the electricity came back on, probably 2 hours later, which we didn't know was going to happen. What she did was she convinced the Hall of Fame people that we should be allowed, the 19th Century Committee, to stay in the Hall of Fame for at least an hour after it usually closes at 5 o'clock and continue our sessions so that nothing would be screwed up and that everything would happen as it should. Now, it is true that a couple of things were changed around, but in the end, I think we stayed until about 5:45 because we had one special thing in the Grandstand Theater that we got to do after everyone had left the hall. And because of that, because of Cassidy's doing and being able to manipulate the Hall of Fame staff and everything, the 19th Century Conference was able to go through, fix one little thing the next day, and it's as if nothing ever happened. That's what she can do.
And that is why she is called Saint Cassidy. So
Correct.
There you go. Now, next week, we're going to have a fellow SABR member, Eric Vickery, with us to talk about his research and his new book, Season of Shattered Dreams, Post-War Baseball, the Spokane Indians, and a Tragic Bus Crash That Changed Everything. The book looks at the post-war impact on baseball and the 1946 Spokane Indians bus crash. This is sure to be fascinating. It's not a subject that is spoken about a lot in baseball circles. So I'm going to encourage everyone to stop by our meeting next week, Monday, May 13th at 7 o'clock for another very, very interesting baseball discussion. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. If you enjoy watching our videos, please like and subscribe to our channel to keep up on all of our weekly chapter meetings. And if you are a baseball fan who is not a SABR member, you need to stop by our website today and join. Just go to sabr.org/join to see the long list of perks you get as being a SABR member. We would love to have you. I'm going to put a link to our website in the description, and I'm also going to put a link to David's publisher's website in the description so that you can get that discount too for his new book.
Eric
Ostrowsky, go. What was that?
We're same publisher. His book.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, Roman and Littlefield. So there you go. Mm-hmm.
That's fabulous. All right. So we'll have Eric in next week. David Ostrowsky, thank you very, very much for doing this. This has been a great discussion of a very interesting ball player morphing into, once again, another fascinating discussion of the Baseball Hall of Fame. So let's get everybody out of here. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Have a good night, everyone.